Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to the first ever Growth Mindset podcast from IEC Husaini. I am one of your hosts, Shawn Abbas, joined here with the other host, Mohammad Raza, with our special guest, Bilal Rizvi. This is going to be a podcast about the current environment, things that are going on in the current world. We're going to discuss ways to deal with such issues, improve ourselves, and improve our community. And before we get into too deep about what we're going to be going into, a couple things that I want to make sure that everyone out there in YouTube world that is listening in, you can use the live chat feature. So you'll see the little button for live chat. You can use that to send in questions, and we'll try to answer them as we continue this podcast, throughout this podcast, and as we continue this series. With that said, also one more thing, social media. So if you see this podcast and you want to share it, please use the hashtags IEC Podcast and IEC Growth Mindset. I'll pass it to Mohammad. You can go ahead and introduce our speaker for today.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. So this is our first in the series of lectures. So I'd like to just give a brief introduction to Sayyid Bilal Rizvi. We know him pretty well in our community. He's well known as an Islamic lecturer who has been reciting majalis for several years, both in the United States and internationally. He has lectured on a number of issues in Islamic thought, ranging from contemporary challenges, history, social issues, and Islamic belief and theology. He has been invited for several seminars, such as an invitation by Rutgers University in New Jersey to present his paper on the role of the number 40 in the world religious traditions. He originally studied biology and medical sciences at the University of Texas at Arlington and Loyola University in Chicago. Since 2016, he's been engaging in his religious studies full time. He began his religious training in America and then had a privilege to study in the Islamic Seminary in Najaf. He's continuing his studies under the guidance of his teachers from Najaf and had the privilege to study under Dr. Sayyid Nizamuddin Ahmad, who is a PhD in Near Eastern Studies from Princeton and a reader at the Shia Institute. Some of his religious research interests include Arabic literature, Islamic law, Islamic philosophy, theology, Hadith studies, and Islamic spirituality. He plans on pursuing his doctorate soon in Near Eastern Studies and Islamic Studies. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Sayyid Bilal Rizvi to speak.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for the very kind and elaborated introduction. I hope both of you are doing well.
Alhamdulillah, we're doing great. Yeah.
So I won't keep it too long because it's not a lecture, not a monologue. Inshallah, I hope to have some dialogue and some fruitful discussions with both of you. I know both of you have excellent ideas based on our personal relationship of several years. So very briefly, I'll just introduce the series. And then after that, we can get into, questions or just see where the flow of the conversation goes. So initially, I know we touched base about 3 to 4 months ago about this idea. And there were many obstacles on my end, on the scheduling end from the other side as well. But we came to the conclusion that we'll title this series Growth Mindset. So it's important for us to understand that what really is a mindset. And how does the mindset of an individual impact how they understand the world around them and how they approach their life in terms of their day-to-day actions? So the entire goal of this series is that we'll deal with many of the challenges found within the modern world. Now, is this to say these challenges didn't exist before the modern world? Not necessarily, but what I'm proposing is that due to the increase of industrialization, due to the increase of the focus on the materialistic nature of the human being, we see that many of these challenges have been put at a level that's never before seen in human history. And unfortunately, the mindset, using that word since it's in our title, has not really been to challenge the problem and to find the solution. The mindset has been to put in stopgap measures. And I'll give you an example. Now, I have some sort of qualifications in the medical field. I did my MA, I did, undergrad degree. Oftentimes when you go to a doctor today and you have a symptom such as heartburn, the doctor will give you a medication to cure that heartburn, but they won't go to the underlying issue, which could be the diet, which could be the stress that is inducing that symptom. And I think this analogy kind of really explains many of the issues we're facing in the modern world. We try to understand them at a very superficial level, and we try to give stopgap measures. So what I hope to discuss in this series is that we go beyond that superficial level and we come to understand many of the crises that are being faced at a deeper level. For example, in the modern world, one of the challenges that is spoken about is the environmental crisis. And whenever you hear any ecological experts speaking about the environmental crisis, it's always this fossil fuel or the emissions of that particular gas. But nobody understands this as a spiritual crisis. Why is it that the man of today feels so dissatisfied and so disconnected from nature? And I know Muhammad Ali is sitting outside, so maybe he's the exception to this. But why is it that we feel so disconnected from nature that we don't give it respect? Whereas when you look at the Quran, or you look at the world view and the mindset given by the Prophet Muhammad and his Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, it was a mindset of giving respect. We see that the word ayah is used for many of the natural phenomenon, whether it's the mountains, whether it's the wind, whether it is the seas. And we find that this same word ayat, which means sign, is used for the verses of the Quran. So we see from the Islamic mindset, a great respect is being given to nature. So this is just one issue. But if I'm going to simply state what the goal of the series is without going into too much depth, as I said, I don't want to go into too deep of a monologue. The goal of this series is that I want to propose that the man of today, and by man I mean human being, men and women, need to return to their nature. And that nature was something which was recognized by human beings for thousands and thousands of years. And it's only in the modern world that the most natural of notions are being questioned today. For example, man since the Stone Age until the modern world recognized that the family structure was as necessary as the air we breathe and the water we drink. But today, you find it's something that you have to prove to individuals. Or for example, we find that mankind dealt with hardships and challenges for, since the beginning of time. But it's only in the modern world that hardship is taken as a sign that God doesn't exist, for example. So many of the issues are going to be discussed, and we'll try to get to the deeper understanding of them in order that we can return to our origin. And that origin, of course, is centered around the remembrance of the divine, the remembrance of God. And with that said, I'll let you guys take over. As I said, I'm trying to keep the monologue short.
Definitely. I really like this concept of this growth mindset. But as opposed to, in order to define growth mindset, well, how would you describe what the common mindset is? You touched upon this really interesting idea that, when some people go under hardships, they start blaming God, for example, for it.
And that's a very modern phenomenon. In traditional Muslim societies, a normal common person was going through war, and there were many time periods where there was a lot of famine and war and struggle. That person didn't take that hardship to be, oh, God doesn't exist. But that's something which occurs today.
Well, how old would you say that phenomenon is? I mean, I can say in the recently we live in a very convenient society, right? We have everything at our fingertips. We literally, we have knowledge of the world. We can order our pizzas. We can find our gym workout. We can do everything from the comfort of our couches and our beds. That convenience has definitely contributed to that mindset where, any type of struggle. But how far back should we look when we're trying to kind of dive into these things?
I mean, to pinpoint an exact point in history where this, I guess, metaphysical and theological turn took place really requires a long discussion, because there were many events that contributed to that. But what we can say is that the more time has progressed to the modern world, the more we've seen an attack on the most human and the most natural of institutions, such as the institution of believing in a higher power. That's something which, of course, there were always those who denied and rejected God. But in the modern world, what we can say is different is that really it's become a very popular culture. And that open culture is something which is very unique. Now, before we go into that question, because that itself is its own subtopic, Muhammad Ali had raised a point, and that point was about mindset. If you don't mind rephrasing your question that you were asking.
Yes, basically, my first question was, how would you describe the current mindset in terms of, instead of what you would also define as a growth mindset? How would you define the two different types of mindsets?
Well, I mean, okay, so there's two words that are over here. Anytime you have a term, right? You get down to what do we really mean by the term. So over here, we have growth and we have mindset. Now, in terms of what really is a mindset, is that I would say a mindset is your worldview. How do you understand the happenings of the world around you? And how does this understanding impact your actions? And, although this is very seldomly mentioned, one of the key things that we try to take from the Quran and from the teachings of the Prophet and his Ahlul Bayt is that what was the worldview of Ahlul Bayt? That how did Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam view the world around him? What was it that the Imam would teach to his companions that this is how you should look at the world? And this is something which is very profound. And this is something that each of us, whenever we hear a tradition from the Imams, or we hear a story from the Imams, we should reflect that what is it that the Imam is trying to get across? What point of understanding? Such as when Imam Ali in his famous tradition says, Ilahi ma abadtuka tama'an fi jannatik wala khawfan min narik. ولكني وجدتك أهلا للعبادة. Imam Ali says that, oh God, I didn't worship you out of the desire of paradise or the fear of hell, but I worshiped you because I found you worthy of being worshipped. And in this tradition, what are we really getting from this tradition? At the end of the day, whether you're worshiping for paradise or fear of hell, or you're worshiping God because he's worthy, you're worshiping in terms of action, right? All three of those people are engaged in an act of worship. But Amir al-Mu'mineen is differentiating between the mindsets of these different groups. Now, it's not something wrong to worship out of the fear of hell or out of the gain of paradise, because it's mentioned in the Quran, reward and punishment. But Amir al-Mu'mineen goes to show that the highest level of individual is that individual who is truly God conscious. And what we want to build in our mindset and in a mindset of growth is to increase God consciousness. You see, oftentimes our idea of religiosity in our communities is the person who prays the most, or the person who fasts the most, or the person who always wears the shalwar kurta or has the longest beard, for example. But that could just be an action which is performed. We can definitely have a person who lives a normal lifestyle. He does his wajibat, what's requested of him, what's necessary of him. He stays away from that which is prohibited. But this person, although outwardly, quote unquote, is living a normal life, this person could be the most God-conscious person. And in the modern world, one of the challenges which we are facing that kind of destroys this growth mindset is that we're too much consumed in materialism. And that comes from the loss of centrality in the life of the human being. You see, the human being needs centrality, whether that's a routine in your daily life, whether it is the belief in God to center you in your actions, whether it is a code of law as presented by the Sharia and the law, or whether it is a code of ethics as presented by the Quran and the teachings of Ahlul Bayt, we need centrality. Because it is only through centrality that a person is able to grow spiritually in a well-balanced manner. And what's being lost in today's world is that one aspect of life is really being emphasized, whether it's material growth, whether it's, only the physical body. And what we lose is that holistic picture. And we lose that central point, which should be the movement of every single human being. And that really in traditional societies was the belief in God. And that belief in Allah really brought a level of tawheed and unity in the sense that every single action a person would take, whether it's their work, whether it's taking care of their body, whether it's going to the gym, whether it's their sleep, whether it's their studies, all of that revolved around gaining closeness to God by developing our own self.
So I got a question. On
please.
that. Would you say that some of the challenges we face these days are very unique compared to what previous societies had not faced?
Absolutely. I mean, there's.
Can you give me some examples of that?
Yeah, there's so many different.
Hold on, Sayyid Bilal. Before we get into that, I just want to. We have a few dozen viewers right now. I just want to remind them all. Please, these challenges that Sayyid Bilal has mentioned and Mohammad Ali just asked about. Share your thoughts. Share your thoughts about what you think, the challenges that you feel, and you can make this anonymous if you like, and also questions. Feel free to ask questions. So sorry to interrupt.
Just a reminder, today's discussion is a very general discussion. We'll go into specific issues because this is a series as opposed to one podcast. But I'll let Muhammad Ali take the floor because he was asking something.
Yeah, so just want to also read it. If you have any questions, stuff, we might, even if we don't get to them today, we'll definitely try to address all of them. We want to keep this as an open discussion for everybody. But yeah, I was essentially asking, compared to what would you say some of the unique challenges that we have today, and then how would just to add to that, how would God consciousness, for example, help you through some of those types of challenges?
Yeah, so I mean, there are many challenges that are unique today, especially with the advent of technology and the interconnection of human society. And of course, to be interconnected is something which is praised in Islam because the community structure is a fundamental structure. But at the same time, it does bring about challenges because nowadays, for example, everyone's business is posted on social media. Whenever you have, a breakfast, it goes on your Instagram story, or whenever you go traveling, every movement, every spot that you stop by, it's posted on the Insta. But, that's just an example of when everything is being publicized in that manner. Many people, they begin to look towards others, that why is it that this person is able to do all of this, yet I don't have the time, I don't have the facilities, I don't have the financial means to do that. So, for example, one example of how, modernity has really brought about challenges is that this culture of, competing with each other materially, for example, is something which is more prevalent. Now, there is positive types of competition as well. For example, within Islamic terminology, we differentiate between the terms hasad and ghibta. The term hasad, of course, means envy. And envy, as we know, is something which is really condemned in the traditions of the Ahlul Bayt and the Prophet, where, for example, the Prophet says, nothing consumes your faith like envy. That envy consumes your faith in the way that fire consumes wood, for example. But at the same time, ghibta is an idea that one, when he sees another person having something positive, they have in their mindset, and really it's a mindset. You see, it's the mindset which differentiates between envy and this positive form. And in ghibta, we see that a person says, oh God, you've given that person, may you give him more, and may you give me as well. So you see the difference in the mindset over there. But sometimes, we become consumed because everyone posts the best aspects of their lives publicly. And we see the best aspects of their lives, but we don't understand the struggle that that person went through. So this publicization of information in the modern world is something which is a unique challenge. Another unique challenge I'll mention is, for example, we got into the theological discussion, we didn't go too deep into it, is, for example, the problem of evil. That if God is omnibenevolent, if God is all good, and God is all wise, and God is all powerful, why is it that there are hardship and challenges, and there are many messed up things within this world? You see, in traditional Islamic society, as I mentioned before, this question, although it was dealt with, it didn't lead anyone to a crisis of faith. But today we find that it does lead to a crisis of faith. And the reason it does that is that, for lack of better words, there is an agenda to promote a particular ideology. And the reason that this ideology is being promoted is because it helps the material means of the world. There's people, there's a famous quote that says that, a person works their entire life. And the reason you're working is that, you want to enjoy life, or you want to have the means to, you want to have those means to where you can live comfortably. But in the process of trying to do that, you're spending 12, 14, 18, putting 70, 80-hour work weeks. And in that whole process, life passes us by. We're always waiting for that next moment, that next step. And in the waiting of the next step in today's world, what
you never get there.
we have in our head just slips away from us.
Going back to what you said before, I feel like that agenda, and I heard this, and I'm gonna quote a Lex Luthor line from Superman versus Batman,
Nice.
where he goes,
I have never seen it, but
it's not that great. Don't no need to. But
what's the line?
He goes, if God is all powerful, then he is not all good. And if God is good, he is not all powerful. And it goes along with that agenda that you that you kind of hinted on, or kind of touched upon, where this idea, if there are bad things happening in the world, then how is there a God? And I get this question a lot. So for the viewers that aren't familiar, both Mohammad and myself, we teach at the IEC Sunday school. And we get these type of questions a lot. Is, what it comes down to is God good? And I mean, my answer, and please, I want to hear both of your answers, is no, it's not about good or bad. It's about justice. God is just. Yeah. It comes down to adalat. And then my other question, so kind of in the same light, is you touched upon this mindset. And would you say there's an idea of motivation? I mean, I've encountered people where they go, they're like, oh, we wanted to go to the majlis on Thursday, and instead, we went out and we got every single light was red, and it was a sign from God that we need to turn around and go home because there was no way we were going to make it on time before the Moulana set. So we're like, what's the use? We'll just watch it on YouTube. So that motivational aspect of the mindset just doesn't seem to be there with some people. Whether the challenges are, being able to, default to YouTube, or being able to do certain things that, will quote unquote substitute for attending, a majalis at the center, or anything else. So kind of a two-folded question.
Okay. So as for the first question, which is, trying to solve the so-called problem of evil, we do have entire podcasts dedicated to that in the series. So I'll go more into depth at that time.
Nice.
Because, I feel like that is something that one needs in a part of this growth mindset, how to deal with trials. But very briefly, very, very briefly, it's really comes around, how do we define evil and how do we define good? Oftentimes when we define evil and good, we define it as that which is averse in our nature and that which is suitable to our nature. Like, for example, if I ask you that, is drinking a soda good or bad? There's two ways you could answer that. You can say that it is good in the sense that it aligns with my taste buds and I gain a type of pleasure and enjoyment out of it. But is that really the definition of good? The definition of good, on the other end, could be that, it should contribute to the functioning of the human body, whereas, soda is harmful to us. And I'm not saying drink soda or not drink soda. This is the first example that came to my mind. But really, we need to define evil. And what evil is a movement away from God. And evil in and of itself does not exist. Evil is the foundation of good. And, there's much to be said. It's not my topic. I don't want to answer this question, 50%, because it really leaves viewers more confused. So we'll discuss it at its more, at the appropriate spot. But what was the second question, if you could remind me?
About motivation, right? You find every little excuse to not attend, or an excuse to delay a prayer, or an excuse to just anything, or you find it's like, okay, I'll make it up, or I'll find substitutes for the actual.
No, so that's very important, in this discussion about growth mindset. And I keep repeating this term on purpose because, it's the title of the series, and you need the clickbait, as they say.
No, and please share to all the viewers. Please share the link to this podcast so more people can see. But continue.
So a believer is always motivated. There's a verse of the Quran that says that, those believers or those individuals that will struggle until they meet their Lord, struggling, they'll meet them. And when we look at the lives of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, we see the utmost motivation in every single action, every single moment of their lives. For example, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, when the Imam, after he was struck upon the head, the Imam in his final moments would say that never has the sun risen up, but the sun has found Ali to be sleeping. That shows the profound motivation that existed within the Prophet and the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. The Prophet would say that no prophet of God was given difficulty like I was. And that type of motivation, to repeat this point, can only come up when we understand the world around us. When we have true conviction that there is a higher entity, and we need to understand the world through the lens of this entity and through the lens of those beings that propagated his message, the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt, only then can we have motivation. You see, one thing that you look and you'll find amongst the most successful people in the world is motivation. Now, granted, many of their motivation may have been materialistic or limited, but we find naturally that we respect people that are motivated. When you hear about an athlete such as Kobe Bryant, and you hear that 4 a.m. he would go and put up jump shots until 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. and he would have a routine. Or for example, when you look at an inventor like Elon Musk, and we see that every 15-minute block of his schedule is scheduled to a particular task that he has to do, we give respect towards these people in their own field. naturally we're inclined towards those people who are motivated. And
Yeah.
that's really what a believer should be. A believer should have that motivation. When we look at the lives of many of our great ulama, or we look at the lives of many of the people who dedicated their lives to propagating the religion, we find that many of them would spend 18 hours a day in their work, and each moment of their day was utilized.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's how really the imams spent their lives as well. For example, there's a famous hadith called the hadith of Unwan al-Basri, and I won't go too much into details. Basically, a 94-year-old man comes to Imam as-Sadiq. He asks Imam as-Sadiq for advice. The imam initially sends that man away saying that every single hour of the day and night I spend, in different recitations of the names of God. So the point being, motivation really comes from our worldview. And once we establish that worldview, then we'll be motivated in our actions. That's why wherever the Quran mentions amal and action, it mentions iman and belief right aside the action. Because iman is that form of motivation that keeps us going forward.
Yeah. It really reminds me of this, especially this concept of growth mindset, or also just your worldview, the way your mental process is. It reminds me of a teaching by this philosopher, Alan Watts, who talks about this concept in the modern world. You mentioned this actually earlier, it ties back into it. We're constantly working in order for us to have some time for leisure later. But if your mindset is that the work that you do, you learn to, for example, enjoy the struggle. You learn to be thankful for the struggle. If the work that you do becomes like play, then you're already in that state. You already have reached your goal. Example is, for example, your mindset could be when you wash dishes. You see a tremendous amount of dishes in front of you. You've washed 1,000 in the past. You're gonna have to wash 1,000 in the future. But if your mindset is, I just have to wash this one dish, that's all I have to do, then that's all you have to do at any given moment. You're not worried about the future or the past. It becomes like a game. Or another example that this philosopher gave was that, if you look at a bus driver, right? Sometimes bus drivers are some of the most harassed people that you'll ever see. They're constantly dealing with people and traffic all the time. But in this mindset is that this bus driving thing becomes like a game where they're going through traffic, weaving through here and there, and it becomes an enjoyment for them. They've already then reached their goal, their destination. And I think you kind of hit it, that's life is struggle. We've all seen that. But if you learn to enjoy the struggle and especially be thankful for it, it becomes your leisure. It becomes your thankfulness. If your mindset can change into that, then in essence, you've already, reached this type of, destination. And a lot of times, some of the struggles are so difficult. We need to personally sometimes tie into the struggles of the elevate, or tie into our remembrance and thankfulness to God in order to kind of pass through the struggles and then be thankful.
There's one thing that, I'll add to that. I think part of it doesn't have to be a struggle. I mean, in order to get our mind to get that growth mindset, it is part of motivation, right? We're going back to the motivation thing. I mean, there's a very American quote, right? We hear this all the time: no pain, no gain, right? In order to build something, whatever it is, whatever it's muscle, you gotta fight through it. If you want to get better at basketball, you gotta fight through it. If you want to get, you want to make more money, you gotta fight through it. No pain, no gain, and you gotta do things that no one else has done to get better. And I think what that does in essence is it can demotivate some people. There was a study done in the University of Washington. I just happen to know this because I read about this recently, but even professional athletes, when professional athletes are training for something, they are not training at full capacity every day. They train at like 50%, 40% on a daily basis, so it could be sustainable. It's not about how hard you train, it's the sustainable aspect of it. And I think we can...
Yeah, or being
Right.
regular or consistent, I guess.
Yeah,
Consistent, exactly.
this is actually something found in the traditions of Ahlul Bayt. Imam Ali has a tradition where he says, you know, that which you perform, if it is small and consistent, will give you returns greater than that which is large and not continuous. You know, and this is really the spiritual advice which is given by scholars, that when one wants to advance in their spirituality, if, you know, you're struggling to pray 5 times a day, and then one day you wake up 1 hour before Fajr and you do tahajjud and you do all of these different du'as and recitations, what's going to happen? You're going to get burnt out in 2-3 days because you don't have that spiritual stamina. So how do you get that spiritual stamina? You do that by gradually improving, gradually adding to that routine. And that's why Imam Ali says that, you know, or one of the other Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, a tradition, I don't remember which Imam says this exactly, but no 2 days of a believer should pass the same. So although it's good to have a routine, because a routine keeps us disciplined, one really needs to be constantly engaged in a state of growth. And you know what the beauty about the human being is that our capacity for growth is unlimited. No other creation can we say this about. Because even the angels, their capacity becomes limited at a certain point. But the human being really is that battle zone because of the element of desire and the element of intellect. We have a profound valley where the peak can be on one side, but the, you know, depth towards the bottom can also be there as well. So, you know, we have an infinite capacity for growth, and one really needs to channel that. And it really, as you know, you nailed it on the head. Mindset plays a huge part. And even though, you know, it's a very loose word, I'm trying to think what would be the proper Arabic equivalent for that within our hadith and within, you know, terminology that we understand. And although there's no, you know, set equivalent that I can find, but there are many different concepts which relate to this, such as iman and such as niyyah and intention. Because intention, you know, the beauty of the system of God and what Allah has done for us is that Allah rewards us on our intention, but He doesn't punish us on our intention.
SubhanAllah.
So if I can rephrase that, God rewards us on our mindset. In many ways, if a person can have a positive mindset and every action of his has a positive intention, you feel that that person is always in a state of growth. So, you know, that was an interesting point that came to my mind as we were, you know, going through this discussion.
So what do you think? I mean, mashallah, that was really well said. I like that. We are judged on our mindset, or because when it comes down to it, our intention for good even outweighs our intention to do bad, and our actions are ultimately what God's gonna judge us for. But even if we have the intent to do good, we're
rewarded.
And in many ways, having a negative mindset, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't punish us for it, in a way, it causes us to punish ourselves. The negative mindset itself, it becomes a punishment in its own. Yeah.
So what do you two think? I mean, I want to get everyone's thoughts on this. Is, you know, what are the first steps to creating a state? I mean, individually and collectively, to create a mindset of that mindset that we're trying to achieve, where, you know, we have that all trust in Allah and the belief in the al-Bayt that's so strong that it's unwavered. I mean, you know, so I know that a lot of us have it, but there's a lot that are watching and a lot that might be listening eventually that are struggling with it. So what is that first step? What do you guys think?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, this, you know, this series will try to discuss that progression of how a person can build that mindset. But the very first thing I would say, and of course, I'm not saying that this is a definitive answer, but I am saying that this is an answer which is commonly mentioned, is that one needs to undergo the stage of self-reflection and self-analysis. That's very important. If you cannot recognize what are your own flaws and what are those negative entities holding back your mindset, then you can't solve the problem. So it really begins with self-analysis and self-reflection. And as the famous tradition says, man arafa nafsahu faqad arafa rabba. That the one who is able to know themselves is able to know their Lord. And that type of knowing comes from the realization that we have an inner state. If we're able to reflect, we can understand that what is it that opposes this inner state of a human being, and what is it that is holding us back. So that's really where I would say a person begins. Start self-reflecting. If you have to write down some negative habits or flaws which are holding you back, if you have to write down some of the doubts that you have, maybe seeing it on a piece of paper written down or typed out, because that's the medium of engaging notes, even though I personally am a bit old school. But if you even have to do that to see these things, it allows a person to begin to move in that direction. Otherwise, to build that growth mindset really is a lifelong struggle. So you begin with that. And I just even though it's slightly off point, but I remember I read a quote today which I really enjoyed, and that quote said that the reason that people feel uncomfortable being by themselves or being in solitude is because they're alone with a stranger. They're not spending time with someone that they know. If you meet somebody, you don't know that person, and you're stuck in a room with that person, it's kind of uncomfortable until you're able to get to know them a little bit. But that quote said that is our reality with ourselves. And one of the great spiritual teachings that allows a person to move in that growth mindset and allows a person to spiritually progress, that's been emphasized by the ulama, is khalwa and self-isolation. Now, of course, self-isolation doesn't mean we neglect our families, we neglect our responsibilities. But what this means is that you take time to yourself on a daily basis, and in this time you do self-reflection and you account for yourself, that this is what I did today, this is what I have to work on, and all of these different facets. And that's that I would mention as a good starting point. Of course we'll go deeper into the discussion, but at the very introductory level, I think everyone should begin the process of self-reflecting, figuring themselves out, writing it out. And if there's any doubts and questions, then of course they can send them to us. And, according, to my limited capacity, I can, offer what I have to offer.
Yeah, we'll try our best to answer the questions. And I mean, if there are questions after the podcast, this is going to be posted on the IEC YouTube page. So feel free to comment on the actual video, and we can answer questions later on in the series. But the chat is still open, so those who are watching, share your thoughts. It doesn't have to be a question. It could be thoughts on certain struggles, and we might not be able to get to it today, but we can definitely address those. And then questions you have that you want to ask, please utilize it. But I do want to get to say, Bilal, thank you for your thoughts. I want to see, Mohammad, do you have thoughts? Do you agree? I mean, I think we all agree with
Muhammad Ali has many thoughts. He just has to find the right ones.
Subhanallah, I think the discussion
enough time for his stuff.
I think the discussion is going pretty good, and I think the best is to listen more and speak less when it comes to these things.
But what are your thoughts on the first step that one should take to improve their mindset?
Sayyid Bilal and I have actually talked about this quite a bit offline. And one of the things that he mentioned, and we've talked about this in detail, is a recommendation by Imam Musa Kazim al-Islam, where he says that a believer, one of the signs of a believer is that every night he takes account of all of his good deeds and all the bad deeds that they did. In
Self-account.
fact, they're supposed to do it, what, 3 times a day? Was that
A minimum 2 times, the tradition
minimum
says.
2 times? Yeah.
But
And
of
if you
course,
think about this,
before you
if you
do
think
that,
about, I've, if you think about this process, the more you think about it, the more you like reflect on this process, it's so profound because what this ends up doing is you start recalling all of your actions. And it's very difficult at first. If anybody's ever tried this type of exercise, is to be conscious of your actions and to be aware of what you're doing. Very often, we become what the Quran refers to as heedless cattle, where we're just like grazing from one place to another, not really have much direction. That sort of thing. But if we take account of all of our actions, even then, while we're not taking account, we become more aware of what we are doing because we are forcing ourselves to constantly recall the things that happened in our day. And then the other step that happens with this is our threshold of what we could deem as good and bad shifts. If you're moving in a positive direction, what might seem like an okay deed or a permissible deed, it becomes what you consider a bad deed later. Like, you know what, my akhlaq with this individual wasn't as good as it should have been, or for example, I should have done more in this type of case. And that's when you start noticing the growth occur. That now you're more courageous with your actions. You're doing things that are much, which someone with a stronger will would start doing, and it becomes much more easier than to see if you're doing negative things without account. It's very easy to weigh those things lightly. Not only is it I would say one big bad deed that someone does is not as bad as the consistent bad deeds that somebody is doing every day. Those would be more detrimental. It's the same way as one good deed that somebody's doing that's very profound it weighs less than one small consistent good deed. It goes both ways. And
I think a key point that you kind of alluded to is that it's a reoccurring process.
Yeah.
It requires training. It requires returning to that state of consciousness. If I have a piece of paper, in the middle of the piece of paper, I draw a dot and I tell you to stare at that dot. Initially, maybe you'll stare at it 30 seconds, 45 seconds, and then your attention will go left and right. But the moment your attention goes left and right, you train yourself to return to that dot. That initial 30 seconds can become 5, 10, half an hour, 1 hour. And that kind of is that example of God consciousness, that the moment one turns away from the consciousness of God, the goal is to return at that moment. And, there's so many methods to do so, whether it's to remember God, whether it's performing istighfar. Because if you really look at what the word, when we say astaghfirullah rabbi wa atubu ilayh, the word tawbah really means to return. And that signifies that when a person sins, they turned away from God. But now they're turning back. And what is this turning? This turning is returning to a state of God consciousness. So I guess the key point after that first step of self-reflection and analysis and trying to build that consciousness, the second goal of a person is to always return. The door is always open. No matter how low you've steeped in life, no matter what you've done, that doorstep is always open. And that requires you to turn, because the moment you turn towards God, God will facilitate and he will turn towards you.
SubhanAllah.
I agree to that. I mean, mashallah, well said. I have a lot of parents that come up to me. They ask me the question, my son or my daughter, they're not coming. They don't want to come, or they don't want to pray on time. They don't seem to be very interested in Islam the way that we were or we are. And I mean, to add on, if I want to put my own thought into what is the first step, what I tell them is to have them keep coming. The influence of things like azadari. I know, to be at the center, to be around community that is focused on that one thing, I feel like that's important. So to add on to what you said as the first step, I think, part of that would be find a way to keep coming, to keep attending, to keep participating in the community, in the Shia community, to be able to connect. And I think that's a big thing. To once there's a connection there, everything kind of tends to fall into place.
No, absolutely. I think there's very valid points. I think we're coming towards the end of our time. Do we have any questions or anything along those lines?
So there are a few comments on the YouTube chat. So I want to share some of those in our last few minutes. And there is one question. Maybe we'll start with the question, and then we'll go into the comments.
We'll try to answer what needs to be answered.
Yeah. So the question is, growth mindset is the opposite of a fixed mindset. Does this mean if you want to learn anything, you have to first let go of the fixed mindset? Is that so? Essentially, when we're stuck on something, we need to be able to expand our mind to be able to do more. Some of us fall in a rut, a routine that keeps us stagnant.
I understand the question. I was thinking of a way to phrase properly, but what I would say is that if by fixed mindset what is meant is that a person has a routine, a person has a set way of doing things, that's not a problem. Because growth requires a foundation, and your foundation is fixed. A foundation is not going to be something which is shaky. There needs to be a methodology. But with that said, once there is that foundation, a person should always be looking to expand. They should never be satisfied with the level that they're at and the understanding that they're at. And that's really what is meant by growth mindset. And if I misunderstood the question, then please feel free to expound on your ideas, and then I can recounter and give a more detailed answer.
I think that is the question, but I think there's a little more to this too, right? If we it goes back to the hadith of the Imam. If 2 days are the same, you've lost. And so if we're going to continue on a very stagnant and not really grow in our iman or in our mind, maybe there's more that we can do. So there is an element of stepping away from our fixed mindset to go into more, to grow more. As
if that's what is meant, then one should always be in a state of growth. But as I said, please feel free to expound, and I'm more than happy to answer.
Yeah. And I think if you really look at the definition of what stagnant is, it actually specifically refers to still water that has no flow or stream, that oftentimes has a bad smell to it and bad growth in it. Whereas you have running water, which is often deemed as fresh and usually more potable or safe for drinking and consumption and healthier. So we don't want to be a stagnant pool. That's what cultivates disease, as opposed to running water, which cultivates life.
Yeah. That's very true.
We had a comment on what we just said. Fixed mindset, according to Dr. Dweck, I'm not familiar who that is, but is intelligence. It's static intelligence. So we don't expand on our intelligence. So comment that just came in, but a few more comments to wrap up, and please share your thoughts. So one comment came in: growth mindset is a great topic to explore. If our mindset is aligned with the complete belief in Allah and the Ahlul Bayt and rely on His justice, we can feel comfort that justice will be done. So I think that goes back to when we were talking a little bit about, God being good or just. So
that's
I think
a very, very, very good point. I think that's an amazing point. Yeah.
Another comment was knowing yourself is knowing Allah. So I think that came back to reflection, self-reflection. So if we can understand ourselves and dive deeper, we can understand Allah. And then knowing that our hard work and efforts will be paid off and lead to higher achievement is a notion of a growth mindset. And a lot of these, I'm going to give a shout out to Sister Azra Naqvi, who is giving a lot of these comments. She has some great feedback for us. But do you have any comments on that, Sayyid Bilal, or even Mohammad Ali?
No, I mean, I think there's a lot of excellent points that were made. You know, when referring to the hadith, to know yourself is to know your Lord. The notion of hard work being paid off. Of course, we need to define that. What does reward in this situation mean? You know, but that idea is always utilized in the necessity of the hereafter, because one of the rational proofs for the hereafter is that justice needs to be done in terms of action, and that can't occur without belief in the hereafter. So there's many different angles of the discussion. So I think there were many excellent comments that were made, and you know, I look forward to continuing the discussion.
So just kind of wrapping things up here. I think that was a very good discussion. What is the next topic for our discussion that we're going to be talking about?
So I want to, in the series, move very systematically, because as the title suggests, one goal of the series is for one to grow in their mindset and to understand the world around them. And you cannot really understand the world around you unless you have an epistemological base, or you have an understanding of what is knowledge. And over here, the topic I really want to delve into next week or 2 weeks, whenever we have our next discussion, is that can we have absolute knowledge, or is knowledge something which is relative? And we'll get into the question of scientism. Is it that knowledge is only verified through the 5 senses and through the scientific method, or can there be other forms of knowledge? And in that way, before we come to our discussion about a worldview and specific modern challenges, one really needs to have this discussion about what is our basis for forming a worldview, and what is the basis for forming our mindset and ideas.
Great, really look forward to that. Thank you, Sayyid Bilal, for your time. I think this is a really rich discussion. If anybody else has any questions that they want to pose to this, feel free. This is the first time we're doing this, so please share and give any other feedback about this setup. If you guys have any other comments about it, if you guys like this format, or you guys want to see something different, let us know, and we'll definitely listen to your feedback. Thank you so much, everybody.
One last thing, any social media posts, or if you want to share this podcast, please use the hashtag IEC Podcast or IEC Growth Mindset. Hashtag IEC Podcast, hashtag IEC Growth Mindset. With that said, I think we can conclude our session for today.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.